Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakurutam pravaram maninam Patanjalim Pranjaliranatosmi Stuve Patanjalim Vyasam Shankaram cha manitrayam Katra Sutrasya Bhashyasya Krama Vivaranasya cha. So you may remember we were discussing the 38th Sutra of Samadhipada, the chapter dealing with concentration called Samadhi. So it's mentioned in the 34th Sutra, it's mentioned that regulation of a breath is one alternate way of making the mind tranquil. So it just one after another, a number of options are given. You may remember in the previous sutra, in the 33rd sutra, a proper attitude, assuming a proper attitude towards different people of different temperaments during different life situations is one way of attaining mental tranquility. So, as I mentioned earlier, Maitri Karuna Mudita Ubekshanam Sugudukha Punya Apunya Vishayanam Bhavanataha Chitta Prasadanam. The term used in the Patanjali system is Chitta Prasadanam, which means tranquility of mind, a state of mind which remains stable, contented, unshaken in all life situations. This can be attained by adopting a proper attitude towards different people whom we meet in our everyday life situations. A very simple, very practical. From a purely psychological point of view, it is a very healthy, very rational approach. Normally, we may meet people who are more or less friendly with us, who belong to our own level of spiritual growth. Then there are those who may not be as advanced as us. And then there are those who are more advanced. And then there are those who are full of negativity. Patanjali makes a very interesting remark elsewhere. In fact, to be more precise, the commentators dealing with Patanjali's, some of the sutras like, Prativaksha Bhavana means, adopting an attitude that will remedy negativity, a counteractivity. So a person who is so greedy and who will do whatever, who will go out of the way to obtain wealth, even cheating, deception, and so on. Such people can concentrate, focus on, meditate upon the evils of wealth, and also the fact that money, that is the root cause of greed, will not bring us stability, peace of mind, and happiness. So once a person keeps that in mind, it can eventually help him to remedy the problem of greed. So that's one way to do that. It may not, right at the beginning, it may be an intellectual understanding of the limitations of wealth. It may begin as an attitude, as a conviction, an intellectual conviction that wealth is not all that matters in the world. You understand that. But then that attitude that conviction should become an emotional approach, a psychological approach to life-day situations. This happens through constant contemplating bhavana, means focusing on mind, focusing on this subject, a counter thought. It means greed is a problem, so a counter thought to remedy the problem of greed. So money, in fact, greed has caused so many problems in the world. Nations and empires have collapsed. Civilizations have been destroyed. People have been murdered, subjected to genocide, massacres due to greed. It could happen to nations, races, and people. So once you just focus on this intellectually, and then it influences our mind, our emotions and attitudes, then it helps us, after all. But if you read every day, if you read books that tell you about problems of greed, not as a sermon or as a philosophical discourse. Suppose you read books, writings, creative writings, fiction writings, short stories, novels, stories. The whole Mahabharata, the biggest book the world has seen, 145 verses. 145,000 verses. Thousands of characters, hundreds of dynasties, and hundreds of highly philosophical dialogues, of which Bhagavad Gita is just one. And Bhagavad Gita is actually the most profound among those dialogues. It happens to be the most well-known, that's all. Okay, now the whole war was fought because of greed. Or lust, as you find Homer's Iliad, another story. So you find these things happening in civilizations, in nations, in races. So counter thought. So a kind of a counter thought to remedy a problem. Through these means, you may be able to ward off negativity. Negativity is a very serious problem. It is contagious. Much more contagious and much more destructive than any physical illness. Flu or cholera may not be as problematic. If you associate with people with a lot of negativity, you become skeptical, you become doubtful, your conviction shattered, and you don't have anything to hold on to. And such a mind is a fertile ground for all wrong ideas, self-destructive ideas, destructive to the person involved, in concern, destructive to others also. So a long distance. So that's why Maitri, Karuna, Mudita, Upeksha. Long distance, total indifference. Is it possible for you to be engaged in a conversation with somebody, at the same time to remain completely indifferent? But if you adopt the right attitude, then mind gets an armor plate. It's like an armor. You take this vaccination for flu. So this idea, it's a kind of vaccination really. This understanding, so that the contagious disease won't be transmitted. That's the idea. So Patanjali is so scientific and so psychological, really speaking. And I think such ideas will be useful even for parents who, when they're trying to bring up children. These ideas, really speaking. Nowadays, you see, I've seen this, I've been to many schools, So children are asked to ask questions. So very often, why should Washington be the capital of America? Why not New York? No, a tendency to ask questions, irrational questions, that's certainly not the way to teach children. So questioning everything, developing a skeptical attitude is very destructive. And Patanjali says, of course, this we don't want to student community, but for grown-up people, it could be very destructive, self-destructive and destructive to others. This is total indifference. It becomes an armor plate, a kind of vaccination against the contagious disease of skepticism. And then 34th Sutra, as I mentioned, is very important. Which so I was reading Swamiji's exposition, which is very, very elaborate. Maybe, when Swami Vivekananda was visiting America, A lot of wonderful things were going on the East Coast. Ghost reading. There were people whose profession was interacting with ghosts on your behalf. You pay a fixed amount, they will talk to your great-great-grandfathers, grandparents. Such things were happening. And Vivekananda refers to all these very, very interesting moments. So, and pranic healing was a concept that is practiced in those days. So Swamiji, keeping all this in mind, gives a very interesting, a very detailed description of this sutra. The sutra is Prachardana Vidharana Bhyam Va Pranasya. Pranasya, is a Shashti Vibhati called a possessive case. So of prana, throwing out and restraining. This is the only word Patanjali uses. Throwing out means breathing out, but it also indirectly implies breathing in. You cannot go on breathing out without breathing in. So by implication, it means breathing in also. Puraka and Rejaka are included, inhaling and exhaling. Then he says, Vidharanabhyam, and retention of breath. Now, as this is a very interesting, it's called kumbhaka, means keeping the breath within. Anta kumbhaka means inner retention, bahi kumbhaka means retaining the breath outside. Both are to be practiced with great care. Retention of breath within generates heat and energy, much more than retention of breath outside. So both should be practiced after one gets fully established in Yama and Niyama. I already discussed this. The word prana means the sum total of cosmic energy that is pervading the whole universe. It controls the whole internal functioning of the human system, and also it manifests in so many different ways, in so many different varieties. And by practicing pranayama, you are connecting your finite dimension of prana with the infinite dimension of the vital force, cosmic energy that is all pervading. Now we will continue Swami Vivekananda's interesting and exhaustive description here. With Patanjali is one of the many ways, but he does not lay much stress on it. So Swami Vivekananda is referring to Patanjali. That's why, va he mentioned here. Va means an option, is vikalpa. Vikalpa means or. That's what it means. So, or through retention and throwing out of prana, one of the means for tranquility. With Patanjali, it is one of the many ways, but he does not lay much stress on it. He means that you simply throw the air out and draw it in and hold it for some time. That's all. And by that, the mind will become a little calmer. But later on, you will find that out of this is evolved a particular science called Pranayama. Mostly, this was the subject of discussion in many texts on Hatha Yoga. Most importantly, the Hatha Yoga Pratipika of Swatma Rama Saraswati, one of the great monks who lived in the 16th or 15th century, who elaborately discussed the subjects. We shall hear a little of what these later yogis have to say. Some of these I have already told you before, but a little repetition will serve to fix it in your minds. First, you must remember that this prana is not the breath. That's an important point. What we call breath is a very gross dimension of prana as mentioned in the Patanjali system. As you may remember the example which I gave last time, the tiny little thread that is tied to the little insect. So that's the breath. it cannot help the minister to escape from the tower. If you remember the story, he will need a huge, strong, thick rope. Then only he can escape from the tower, from the prison. But then, if he can get hold of this many other things along with this tiny thread and then the insect, then what happens, he can, all the way he can push forward and he can finally get hold of the strong, thick rope which he can use to escape from the tower, the minister. I don't want to repeat the story again, which is already mentioned in the last class. But that which causes the motion of the breath, that which is the vitality of the breath, is prana. Again, the word prana is used for all the senses. They are called the pranas. The mind is a prana. So mind also is a dimension of the prana. Mind, intellect, thought, words or actions, all these are different manifestations of the prana. When prana manifests in the form of a thinking process, it is called mind. Deciding process, it is called intellect. When the prana manifests through our hands, we work with it. When the prana remains in the body, there is life in it. So the whole existence is nothing but a manifestation of prana. And yet it is not different from prana. The breath is not prana, but breath is not totally unrelated to prana. That's the idea behind. It is that which manifests itself as force and everything else in the way of motion. The chitta, the mind stuff, is the engine which draws in prana from the surroundings and manufactures out of prana the various vital forces, those that keep the body in preservation, the thought, will, and other powers. So that's an interesting point, remember. It is called internal organs in the Vedantic terminology, and this is accepted in the yoga philosophy also. Internal organs are 4 in number. That is called antakarana in Sanskrit. It's called antakarana. Internal means antakarana means organs. So mana, buddhi, chitta, ahankara in Sanskrit. Mind, intellect, then chittam, which acts as a reservoir of memories, impressions, and the sense of ego. See, I often give the example from Vedantic perspective. When you see an object at a distance, let's say it is actually a statue or maybe a pillar, but that you mistake that pillar for the form of a human being because there is not enough light. So two types of thought process are going on in your mind. Is it a human being or maybe it's a pillar? So sankalpa and vikalpa, one thought is a human being or its opposite or different thought is a pillar or a pillar. When you reach the object close to it, then you come to a decision, you see that object for what it is, and then you understand it is a pillar. So intellect works. Now, if you had seen that pillar last week, and you are able to recollect that object, it's a thing which I saw last week. So, from memory, you recollect the previous experience of seeing the pillar. So the memory should be stored up somewhere. That is chitta. And then you identify yourself. Well, I saw it. So you have to identify a person who was involved in this act related to the memory. That is ego. So that's why, in Vedantic tradition, memory and dreams are supposed to be identical. That's a very interesting thing. Memory and dreams are identical. You see an object in front of you, you close your eyes, and you continue seeing that object. It is memory only. Or you remember that object after 10 years, you see so vividly, it is memory only. You listen to music in this morning, and tomorrow you remember the sound of the music you hear again. You don't hear with your ears, but you hear with your mind. And remembering with mind is nothing but memory. When you see an object and you recollect from a previous experience in this life, you may be able to recollect with name, sound, and form. This is a person I saw. The form is clear. But suppose you have some strong ideas, but you cannot relate that idea to any of your experiences in this life. But the idea seems to be so natural to you. You feel at home with that idea, or with the person, or even you read a book, and you seem to be able to understand when you read what the book contains without much effort. You read another book and you may not be able to understand. So, by the same logic, it should be some kind of a memory. That memory comes from previous life. So when you remember something with name and form, it is from this life. When you remember something without name and form, but as a subtle abstract idea, it is called samskara, it is from previous life. That's what yoga and Vedanta have to say about the distinction between memory and dream. The chitta, the mind stuff, is the engine which draws in the prana from the surroundings, etc. And then these thoughts and memories are preserved in the chitta. By the above mentioned process of breathing, we can control all the various motions in the body and various nerve currents that are running through the body. First, we begin to recognize them, and then we slowly get control over them. Now, these later yogis, Vivekananda is referring to the yoga philosophers who wrote commentaries either on Yoga Sutras, or those who wrote books focusing more on the physical yoga like Hatha Yoga, Pratipika, etc. These later yogis consider that there are three main currents of this prana in the human body. One they call Ida, another Pingala, and the third Sushumna. Pingala, according to them, is on the right side of the spinal column, and the Ida on the left side, and the middle of the spinal column is Sushumna, an empty channel. Ida and Pingala, according to them, are the currents working in every man, every woman also. And through these currents, we are performing all the functions of life. Sushumna is present in all of us as a possibility, but it works only in the yogis. So, through this pranayamic process, through meditation, through concentration, as we ascend to a higher level of consciousness, then the Sushumna becomes active. So, that's why, yogis can cognize things directly without a medium, because the power of cognition, the power of understanding is already awakened in his system through concentration and meditation, by ascending, by transcending the level of body consciousness. All people can do that, but the problem is the body pulls people down. As you ascend and go beyond the bodily level through any of these spiritual practices, then this Sushumna, this Sushumna Nadi it is called, this power that is inherent in all of us will be awakened. But frequently, what happens? The pull of the body, the force of the body that compels us to remain at the physical level. As we move away from the physical level, we go closer to the higher level. So anyway, these ideas are clearly explained in many of the books related to Tantra and so on. Sushumna is present in all of us as a possibility, but it works only in the yogi. You must remember that yoga changes the body. As you go on practicing, your body changes. It is not the same body that you had before the practice. That's very rational and can be explained because every new thought that we have must make, as it were, a new channel through the brain, and that explains the tremendous conservatism of the human nature. So, when we practice when we do some practices, or when we deeply imbibe some values or ideas, and when we internalize those values, and we try to practice them, then what happens? Our brain gets accustomed to those things, those ideas. So those ideas will draw some trails in the system. Now, when you try to read some new idea, when you try to read a new book and try to learn some new ideas which you are not familiar with, there's a conflict between what you are used to and these new ideas. Till you are able to internalize, become familiar with that idea, there's always the conflict between what we are accustomed to and what we are now trying to learn. So that is the secret of the the conflict between conservatism and liberal ideas. That's the idea behind. Or let us say, a conservative mind, a mind which doesn't accept, which is not willing to experiment with a new idea, and others who are willing to experiment. The problem is conservative people seem to have already some well-formed channels in their brain system. But they go deep, they get established in them. But if a person tries to be deliberately non-conservative, he may not have any channels, So that leads to superficiality and this cherry picking, getting new thing, leaving alone something else. You don't practice something long enough to make it yours. The subject continues, Swamiji's discussion continues. And that explains the tremendous conservatism of human nature. That is, as you go on practicing, your body changes. It's not the same body that you had before the practice. And that's very rational and can be explained because every new thought that we have must make, as it were, a new channel through the brain. And that explains the tremendous conservatism of human nature. Mental resistance to a new idea. Human nature likes to run through the ruts that are already there because it is easy. That's why frequently after Sunday lectures, some people say they didn't understand everything. Once or twice I told, if you understood everything that I said, then I had not said anything really speaking. You read a book and you say you have understood everything, then you have not learned anything. You understand a lot and you do not understand a lot more. Then only it would be called learning. So when an ideas are repeated, then channels will naturally be formed. If we understand everything when you hear for the first time, then what it means, what you are trying to learn, what you hear, is not different from whatever you have already learned earlier. Because there is no conflict between the ideas you are trying to learn and the channels which are already formed in the brain system. So that's a interesting point. Vivekananda is making a very, if we say, very interesting analysis, something related to education psychology. You learn, you connect what you are going to teach with what the student already knows. But that connection is only help. That connection doesn't immediately reveal everything that you are teaching for the first time. So human nature likes to run through the ruts that are already there because it's easy. If we think, just for example's sake, that the mind is like a needle and the brain substance is soft lump before it, then each thought that we have makes a street, as it were, in the brain, and this street would close up. But for the grey matter, which comes and makes a lining to keep it separate. If there were no grey matter, there would be no memory, because memory means going over these old streets. Your channels are already there. Your mind goes back to those streets and you remember. That's the idea behind. Where the streets are visible, it's from this life. Where the streets are not, the channels are not clearly visible, then it is a memory coming from another source. But still it should be coming from a previous experience. It should be coming from a previous experience. The previous experience may not be from this life. It could be from another life. From a vacuum, you cannot have a memory. From a vacuum, you cannot have an impression. A vacuum cannot create vasanas, vrittis, samskaras, and memories, and attitudes and characteristics. So, that's what Swamiji said. If there were no grey matter, etc. Now, perhaps you have marked that when one talks on subjects in which one takes a few ideas that are familiar to everyone and combines and recombines them, it's easy to follow because these channels are present in everyone's brain and it's only necessary to recur to them. So you got to, from the known to the relatively unknown. That's you link. When you teach something, you have to connect what the student already knows with something which you are now going to explain. That's how these connections also will be effective only if the new idea can somehow be related to the channels which are already formed in the brain. But whenever a new subject comes, new channels had to be made, so it is not understood readily. Yeah, that's true, because the new channels have to be formed. It takes time. And that's why it is the brain and not the people themselves, refuses unconsciously to be acted upon by new ideas. It resists. Where the cultural roots are not very deep, then it's easy to learn new things. So, but the roots are very strong. These channels which are already there are already very deep, so it's very difficult to create a new channel. The prana is trying to make new channels, and the brain will not allow it. This is the secret of conservatism. The fewer channels there have being in the brain, and the less the needle of the prana has made these passages, the more conservative will be the brain, the more it will struggle against new thoughts. So, the fewer channels they have were being in the brain, and the less the needle of prana has been made. So, whenever you repeat the same ideas to yourself, or whenever you connect with the same idea again and again, either by listening to a lecture on that topic, or reading a book from the library, or maybe discussing among parents, then what happens? These channels become deeper and more clear, and then it's easier to remember again and again. That's why people who never read books and never try to become familiar with the new ideas, their mind loses its ability to think and to study, to to accommodate new methods, new ideas. That's what happens. If you can keep learning, every time you can be a young person, mentally young person. There are people who are very young but intellectually very old. People who are very old but intellectually very young. So Sri Ramakrishna was certainly not an academic. He says, you learn as long as you live. It's a very, and this comes from not an educationist, mind you. Maybe maybe the greatest educationist of all time. Both ways you can look upon Sri Ramakrishna. He says, we learn as long as we live. So, in other words, when we learn new ideas, the pranas are being energized. The pranas remain vibrant, active, and energetic. The more thoughtful the man, the more complicated will be the streets in his brain, and the more easily he will take to new ideas and understand them. So the more thoughtful. Because from time to time, he will be always thinking of new ideas. So it's not that his brain has just a few deep channels. It said Carlyle wrote about the Bourbons. The Bourbons never learned anything and never forgot what they learned, which led to the collapse of the Bourbon dynasty, the French. Carlyle's famous book, The French Revolution. The Bourbons never learned anything and never forgot what they learned. So when he's referring to Louis XVI, the unfortunate king during the time of French Revolution, after the fall of Bastille, he is referring to that. So, if you don't learn anything, there is no problem of you forgetting anything. So, sign print. Yeah. It's the idea behind. So, with every fresh idea, we make a new impression in the brain, cut new channels through the brain stuff. And that's why we find that in the practice of yoga, it being an entirely new set of thoughts and motives, there is so much of physical resistance at first. There's a physical and also emotional. That's why, Patanjali gave a long list of antarayas, vyadis, dhyana, etc. 9 antarayas he mentioned in the earlier sutras, See, Vyadhisthana samsaya pramada alasya avirati bhranti darshana alabdha bhumigattu anavasthitattvani chitta vikshepaha te antarayaha. Psychological problems, obstacles in the path of yoga. Be physical and psychological both. And there are 4, of course these are disease, languor, indecision, carelessness, laziness or sloth. Then sensuality, wrong notion, not getting the point, missing the point, instability. These are the distractions, and there are 4 additional distractions which accompany these 9 ones: pain, despair, shakiness, and inspiration. And it's called, a kind of inspiration and expiration. Swasa, prashwasa. So relatively. These are all byproducts of the 9 major obstacles. So Swamiji is referring to that here. There is so much physical resistance. So we find that part of religion which deals with the worldwide nature is so, etc. So, these resistance and these conflicts are because of the conflict between what we already have practiced and what we are not going to practice. In the practice of yoga, the additional problem is advantages are not easily visible or not so vivid. If you tell a child or if you ask a grown-up person to do something, the benefit of which is there for all to see, which is so easily recognizable, then the resistance will be so much less. But the benefit of yoga is not so easily vivid. I'm not talking about Hatha Yoga. In fact, the one reason why Hatha Yoga becomes so popular is any medical professional will tell you that it has some useful benefits. It's very obvious. It is there for everyone to see and experience, physical yoga. But in what way do you relate meditation, thinking, practice of detachment? Detachment means a kind of not being obsessed with a strong idea with extreme likes and dislikes. In what way do you explain is practical, tangible benefits in our everyday life? Very difficult to understand. So, when the benefits are easy to recognize and very obvious and very vivid, then the obstacles and conflicts will be so much less. When the benefits are not so easily recognizable, it will be much more. So there is so much physical resistance in the beginning. That's why we find that the part of religion which deals with the world side of nature is so widely accepted, while the other part, the philosophy or the psychology, which deals with the inner nature of man, is so frequently neglected. So you can easily tell a man, God creates you, pray to God and he gives you everything, social security, Medicare, good job, everything. It's one way. So very simple. In fact, it's very easy, and so easy for an atheist like Richard Dawkins to shatter, to criticize also. The ordinary anthropomorphic religion which tells you that God one day created this world, and along with the do's and don'ts, you do this and everything is fine. If you don't do this, then it is that the masses can be drawn towards that sort of religion very easily, and it becomes very popular, and it can lead to terrible violence. On the other hand, a religion that tells you that you have a responsibility. You look up, you take care of your mind. You take care of your attitudes. You have a responsibility. You have to practice yamas and niyamas. God will not just put everything on a platter and give you. That's the easiest thing, for people to follow. On the other hand, yoga tells you you have a responsibility. You have to take care of your own psychological and physical welfare. Psychological welfare, you have to be friendly with good people. You should admire those who are more advanced. You should be sympathetic for those who are less fortunate. And you should try to keep a long distance from people whose association could give you skepticism. So you have a responsibility. If you don't have any moral responsibility on your part, and if there is a God who will just give everything to you, just show your allegiance, your loyalty to Him. And you should say that in the Old Testament, Jehovah got so angry because they were worshipping another God in front of His temple, and Jehovah was not amused by that. He got terribly angry and uses some strong language also, which I don't want to quote now, Old Testament. It's very simple. People can easily understand that kind of religion, but a religion that tells you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to be a good person. A good woman, a good man, or good woman, you have to practice. You have a responsibility to practice these moral values. You should not hurt anyone. You should not be violent towards anybody. You have to practice truthfulness, freedom from greed and possessiveness. Then only you can be a truly religious person. When a religion tells you that, then naturally, it's not very popular with people. People are very happy if the God can take the whole responsibility to think on your behalf. For physically we are ready to work, but thinking is much more difficult. thinking and self-analysis and developing moral qualities much more of a challenge, very unpleasant. If somebody could think on our behalf and tell us what we had to do, that's the easiest thing that we would be looking for. In fact, physically we may be willing to do many things, but we may not be ready to take the pain, to bear the pain of thinking for ourselves, taking care of our own moral life. It takes a lot of effort, thinking more strain, it's more tedious, more strainful. So Vivekananda is actually putting this idea behind. That's why he says, that's why we find that the part of religion which tells with the world side of nature is so widely accepted. The religion that tells you this world is wonderful, easy to understand. But a religion that tells you that you have a responsibility to perform, that is not so widely accepted, not so very popular. While the other part, philosophy or the psychology, yoga for example, which deals with the inner nature of man, is so frequently neglected. We must remember the definition of this world of ours. It is only the infinite existence projected into the plane of consciousness. The infinite manifesting through the prism of relativity. So the finite in Vedanta and also maybe in physics is the realm of time, space and causation. That's a finite. When the infinite, the beyond, manifests within the realm of time, space and causation, that's this world. So also the infinite prana projecting or manifesting or projecting within our own psychological mechanism or psychophysical mechanism, it is called breath. But so this breath is not totally detached from prana, but it is certainly not the same as prana. So the discussion will continue in the next session. So thank you. We will have interaction now. Okay. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Darshan Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Again interaction. Any doubts?
Swamiji, you speak of greed.
Greed.
Okay. There's personal greed and there's collective greed. Correct?
Yeah.
In other words, an individual can have too much, nations can have too much, and others have so little. Yeah. And then the nation that is greedy is taking away from the nation that doesn't have much.
Yeah.
There's an exploitation.
Yeah.
And there are consequences. There's human suffering. There's degradation of the land. There's damage to the human psyche. Correct.
And dumping the nuclear waste in the ports of the poorer countries, third world countries, that's the most terrible manifestation of exploitation into our times. Please continue.
Well, with your example of nuclear waste, there's an absence of responsibility.
Yeah.
In other words, one nation or one company or one corporation or one collective is damaging another.
Yeah.
There's an absence of the integral global consciousness.
Yeah.
There's a fragmentation, a breaking up, a schizoid, alienation. And it seems with certain leaderships we cannot diffuse this because of their power and their destruction. And we all become victims.
Yeah, true.
And maybe it comes down to the individual has to step aside and begin with self-responsibility to limit, neutralize the forces that are so destructive.
Yeah.
And they're destructive not only in an environmental sense, or global, or cosmic, but also to the human heart. And it seems that within the psyche, there are forces at work. Some that are progressive, some that want to have greater consciousness, greater self-awareness, greater totality. And then there are other forces which are at battle with the ones that want to progress for the humanity and the divinity of the soul. So who are the forces that are attacking or negating the divinity of our soul, our spirit, and our human heart? Why, and for what reason, and what is their motivation in destroying our humanity?
Well, greed is part of human nature, just as divinity is part of human nature. So both are there within us. So as we study and discuss these things, more and more people may become aware of these higher aspects, the divinity aspect. And that may make more and more people conscious of this exploitation or degradation of nature, environment, and all that. So I have to repeat what I said earlier. Yoga can make a difference in this world if we can have more and more people becoming aware of these higher values. Yama and Niyama, for example, apparently very simple, but even the first 5 ones, in fact, these 5 values are enough. Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Parigraha means non-violent, freedom from greed, freedom from possessiveness, and purity of life. And all these are enough actually for human beings to make this world better, preserve the world in its pristine purity. But it doesn't happen. Yoga cannot directly influence a political movement or a social movement. But yoga ideas can inspire individual human beings who could perhaps lead these bigger movements and organizations. We don't know, it doesn't happen. You can give your suggestions how these ideas can reach a larger number of people.
Well, the answer is almost medical. There seems to be a pathology, a sickness, a misery.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to understand, why would humanity destroy? Why would they kill each other when eventually everyone's going to die anyway? So what profit is there in generating collective suffering? I don't understand this.
Yeah, you're presenting the picture of a dark reality that we are confronting every day. And people discuss, they write books, they write articles on this subject. So what we can do, we can try to make people remember or remind them of a brighter, more glorious aspect of human personality. Please continue. So at least yoga and Vedanta, to my surprise, I feel, can remind people that there is some other potential, there are some other possibilities with regard to life and values. That's all we can do. Okay, you have something?
How does the counter-thinking, the Pratipakcha Bhavana, tie into the idea of idealism? Idealism, following on this conversation, the idealism that might be an antidote to the materialistic tendencies.
Yeah. And idealism is not popular anymore in this world.
Well, it's
pragmatism is the dictator that that determines all our actions, collective and individual both.
Well, one thing that can be a motivator for young students is the original concepts of this democratic society, written in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution.
Yeah.
The Constitution strikes me as something that has the counter-thinking built into it, because the idea that extreme thoughts might run amok, you have these checks and balances in government, which is, in a way, a kind of structure that is similar to the individual psychology of thinking the reverse thought, and that they'll find some sort of natural synthesis. But getting back to the individual, I'm looking for some more examples of how thinking the opposite thought can help us maintain our idealism.
Maybe one area one should think of is the field of education. Education is a very important area. You may have noticed as a constitutional expert, you may notice, no? When American Constitution was framed, American society was not so technologically or socially advanced. Westward expansion was still going on, it was still, American society was still in a kind of adolescence. Not that it is not in the period of adolescence right now, maybe. No, but still, it was, and there were many clauses, many constitutional clauses which were built into the system, the constitutional system. Now, in this 21st century, we are reviving some of those clauses, some of those amendments or whatever it is, which are needed for a society that is still about 60% a society of cowboys. But today we are living 21st century. So, in fact, we are still, American society as a whole, still trying to retain some of the crude aspects of 18th century American society, and still trying to live by them and trying to fight for the rights which were framed in the late 18th century. But the world has progressed a lot. Even Europe has become more mature, but still there's something, that kind of changes are not happening here. The point is, there is so much of wide disparity. Highly evolved people, very idealistic, large number of people who are ready to accept wonderful spiritual ideas from all over the world. On the other hand, there is also a very closely knit society which is not willing to. So this is a kind of social, political conundrum that we are facing. Is it a fact?
There was a movement in the 70s where progressive business thinkers were starting to feel like to compete with Japan, which was starting to emerge as a dominant economy at that time, that a different, an adjustment or an adaptation of the old pragmatism had to occur. So there were a lot of management books at the time about jarring the creativity, dreaming big.
Peter Drucker.
Peter Drucker, yes, and the other ones. And all sorts of tangents on that, co-creativity, collaboration skills were being taught. And there was a hope that I had at that time that there would be a tendency on the part of the business leadership, which might influence, the other social and political leadership, that these ideas that were emerging in management education might spur, more self-consciousness, more introspection, and maybe even more idealism. That the crudest aspects of the business community would not drive the rest of society. So these things go in cycles, and it would appear we're in a down cycle, but there is the potential for a rebound, and these ideas may gain popular currency again. But the popularity would have to, the case would have to be made, And there would have to be some opinion leadership, so to speak, on the issue. So that's why I was asking, how do we maybe flip it, you know? How do we get from this trough that we're in to a more compelling thing? And you say it starts with the individual, and, you know, we're all working on it. So, so that much seems to be true.
A secondary comment on that. During the 1960s, some of our leadership at the time recommended not coming out as leaders. Leaders are assassinated, whether they're for peace or for whatever. And it always seems like the bad guys are always protected. And I just wanted to add that on, and also recommend a book by a Japanese author called The One Straw Revolution.
It seems to me it is a matter of accepting that we are agents. And as we act, we either act for good or for evil. So until we accept a personal responsibility for our actions, and we can only change our own actions, the world will not change. I mean, we have to accept agency, our agency, and we have some power. But an agent has some power. That may be little power, but guiding that agency is all we can do.
True.
Hello. Existing in this world, we are forced into inevitably having a relationship with Prakriti. And this, I think, naturally brings attachment. For example, if I were to get into an accident and I'm in the hospital, things are not good, my mom comes in, I can't tell her, Mom, you need to practice indifference right now for your own psychological welfare. But that is what you're saying is required, is our duty to do that in our life.
Well, I think you have misunderstood the very meaning of the particular word used, you know. So an attitude of indifference was recommended here, not as an escape route from acts of compassion, responsibility, or a good citizenship. When you have to live with people or interact with people whose association could shatter your faith or your understanding of spirituality. For example, somebody tells you, why do you worry about the yoga, Vedanta, these higher spiritual? These are all meaningless, worthless. They may use stronger words for that. So why should you worry about this? These are meaningless. Life is meant for enjoyment. There are many people who talk and think and live up to their philosophy. Now, but you, on the other hand, you have a good job, you have everything going on fine for you, but you are also trying to think of some higher values in life, which gives you inner contentment or peace or something. Now, this person's words could shatter your faith in these higher values, and as a consequence, it can create a lot of conflicts for you. When you have to face such situations, then you have to use this tool of indifference as a filtering mechanism. It is not insensitivity, not lack of feeling or sympathy or concern. In fact, there is a gradual evolution. When you become a spiritually enlightened person, you become wise, you develop a mature attitude towards everything. But that is not, and it is in a way, it can be called detachment. Is a very misleading translation, but there are no better words to use in a way. What it means is not being shattered by this, not being affected by this. But a spiritually enlightened person should be humanly very sensitive. The greatest example was Buddha, and not only Buddha, all the great teachers of the world, great religious founders of the world. They were extremely sensitive to human problems. Humanism of a spiritual type, which is more universal. Humanism as understood in Europe, versus the humanism as an ideal related to socialism, communism, capitalist humanism, and so on. But they were all somewhat lopsided. But spiritual humanism doesn't know a boundary of culture, idealism, language, or ideology, or anything. So spirituality is a kind of enlightened sensitivity. In the ordinary empirical level, you are conscious of your duty to your mother, your sister, or relations, those whom you consider as yours, but frequently, very often, it also manifests as total indifference, inhuman indifference, insensitivity towards others. Ordinary world relationship. But when you evolve, when you become spiritually more evolved, you are sensitive to the duties, responsibilities, obligations to your own near and dear ones. But at the same time, that attachment, it doesn't mean indifference of no sympathy, or lack of sympathy or understanding for others. It makes you compassionate, sympathetic in a more universal sense. So it's a spiritual sensitivity, spiritualized sensitivity, human sensitivity to problems and pains, sufferings of others based on the idea of spiritual oneness of society. If you read Vivekananda's book, I give you an example. When Swami Vivekananda was traveling this country, he was highly impressed by this unique socio-economic political experiment you call America. It's egalitarianism, democracy, and dignity of labor, which he praised again and again, organizational efficiency, all this he highly impressed. But he also criticized, the emphasis on material success, what we call the dollar orientation, obsessed with money, material success. That also Swamiji criticized. Going to India, Swami Vivekananda criticized Indians for neglecting economic prosperity, for neglecting the principles of efficiency in organization and all those things. He had something to tell them also to their face, as he had something to tell Western people also to their face. Now, and what was the result? Great men, American men and women joined him, and they considered him as a great hero. And in India, he founded a big organization. And every year, from all over India, you find IIT postgraduates, PhDs, many people have worked in Silicon Valley. I've seen one fellow who had two PhDs, one of my students, 2 PhDs. He was in charge of the entire Middle East for firefighting. Gave up his job and became a monk, a novice. And he was doing some little small work in a small ashrama. So I had a funny experience, which I normally don't quote. I had to attend a conference. So the conference was, of course, attended by a large number of admirers of some other spiritual persons who normally did a lot of, you don't call it magic, may I call it miracles. So one of the speakers said, Vivekananda, Ramakrishna, Paramahamsa did not make any miracle. Then I said, no, every year, highly educated youngsters, they resign their jobs, give up their salary, leave their parents, and shave their heads and go to Veluma to become monks every year from all over in all Indian provinces. Among them there were princes, children of kings. Swami Siddheswaranda, who was the founder of our centers in Germany and France, was the son of a king. Like that many. So don't you think it's a miracle? Miracle is not producing something from air. Miracle also means transforming, inspiring people with creative ideas, great creative ideas. This happening not only to this happens, Shankaracharya does that, Christ does that, even this 21st century after 2000 years, Buddha inspires people. Buddha is still inspiring here in this country. This is not, don't you think it's a miracle? Buddha did not do any visible miracle, but it's a greater miracle of inspiring human beings, living, thinking human beings to follow a great way of life. That's much a higher inspiration. So what I mean to say, coming back to your subject, the fundamental principle is you have to have a very constructive and creative way of what it means in spiritual life. Do you understand? You continue attending this next session. You'll continue the discussion. Okay. So we are a bit too late, so I don't have more time to elaborate on this subject. Thank you. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Datsat Sri Ramakrishna Pranamastu. You have one announcement which I want to make now. We have the Shanti Asrama retreat. Please remember, Saturday, May 28th, we have a retreat in Shanti Asrama. You get more information from our website. April 28th, Saturday, April 28th. You are invited to this Shanti Asrama retreat on Saturday, April the 28th. It's about 95 miles away from here. You get direction, more details from our website. Within a few days, it will be given in the website. You can also take this flyer from our lobby. Thank you. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Datsat Sri Ramakrishna Pranamastu.